Every night, he heard a baby crying from the abandoned palace. But no one had entered that palace for 12 years, not since the night King Daniel Adwael lost his beloved queen, and the newborn daughter he was told had died in her arms. Now, 12 years later, the powerful king stood awake in the darkness, listening as the same fragile cry drifted from behind the sealed gates of Moon Palace, a palace he had locked away with his grief. But tonight, Daniel could no longer ignore it. He took a lantern, summoned his guards, and walked toward the doors he had sworn never to open. Why was a baby crying inside a palace where no child was supposed to exist? Who had been hiding there for 12 years? And why did the mysterious crying begin only when the king was finally ready to uncover the truth about the family he thought he had lost forever? King Daniel Adwael was 41, wealthy, powerful, and feared by enemies beyond Aduran's borders. His palace stood at the heart of a prosperous kingdom, surrounded by marble courtyards, gold-trimmed pillars, fountains, and enormous gardens fed by the royal springs. Traders from the coast filled his markets, farmers supplied his granaries, and gold from the northern hills strengthened his treasury. Yet 12 years earlier, none of that wealth had mattered. Daniel had been a young prince when he married Amara, a woman whose kindness made her beloved by both nobles and ordinary villagers. When she became pregnant, Daniel commissioned Moon Palace as a home for his growing family. He remembered Amara laughing beneath its unfinished arches. "You are building a palace for one little child." "For my wife and child," Daniel had replied. She had placed his hand against her stomach. "Then promise me our child will grow up here." "I promise." But Amara never saw that promise fulfilled. She died after childbirth. The baby, Daniel was told, survived only minutes. He buried them both and sealed Moon Palace forever. Now, standing before its rusted gates, Daniel heard the cry again. His captain, Samuel Akoro, approached cautiously. "Your Majesty, we should return." Daniel tightened his grip around the lantern. "I returned every night for 12 years without coming here." He looked at the palace. "Tonight, I'm going inside." The ancient locks were broken. The gate slowly opened. And from somewhere beyond the darkness, the baby cried again. The sound faded the moment Daniel stepped through the gates. He raised his lantern. Moon Palace was exactly as he remembered it, yet strangely unfamiliar. Dust covered the marble floors, vines crawled through broken windows, and faded gold decorations hung from walls that had once reflected candlelight during royal celebrations. Samuel entered behind him with 4 guards. "Search every room," Daniel ordered. "Nobody leaves until we know where that cry came from." The guards separated. Daniel walked toward the old nursery. Every step awakened a memory. 12 years earlier, he had stood in this same room beside Amara, watching servants arrange a small wooden cradle beneath the window. Sunlight had poured across the floor, and Amara had laughed when Daniel struggled to assemble a tiny wooden horse. "You are a king," she had teased, "yet you cannot build a toy." "I command armies, not toys." "You'll learn." He had smiled. He never imagined that toy would become one of the last things connecting him to his child. Daniel entered the nursery. The cradle remained. His breathing became shallow. Then Samuel called from the adjoining room. "Your Majesty." Daniel turned. Samuel was staring at the floor. There were footprints in the dust. Small footprints. Bare feet. They crossed the nursery and disappeared beside the old fireplace. Daniel crouched. "They're fresh." Samuel touched one cautiously. "Very fresh." Daniel looked around the room. There was no broken window. No open door. No obvious entrance. Then he heard something. A soft creak. From behind the fireplace. Daniel immediately remembered something Amara had once told him. "There's more to this palace than you know." He had laughed when she said it. Now he wished he had asked what she meant. Daniel pushed against the stonework. Nothing happened. Samuel joined him. Together, they moved an old wooden cabinet aside. Behind it was a narrow wooden door. The lock was covered in dust, but the handle was clean. Someone had touched it recently. Daniel's heart began racing. He looked at Samuel. "Open it." The captain drew his sword and broke the lock. The door swung inward. Cold air rushed from the darkness beyond. And somewhere deep inside the hidden passage, a baby began crying again. Daniel stepped toward the sound, then stopped. On the floor beside the doorway lay a small object covered in dust. He bent down and picked it up. It was a wooden horse. The same wooden horse he had carved 12 years earlier for his unborn daughter. Daniel stared at it in disbelief. Someone had brought it back. And suddenly, the question was no longer whether a baby was inside Moon Palace. The question was who had kept his daughter's first toy for 12 years, and why had they brought it back tonight? King Daniel held the wooden horse against his chest as memories flooded back. 12 years earlier, Queen Amara had been sitting beside the nursery window when King Daniel placed the unfinished toy in her hands. "You carved this yourself?" she had asked. King Daniel smiled proudly. "Every mark." Queen Amara laughed softly. "Then our daughter will know her father made her first toy." Their happiness had lasted only a few months. Now King Daniel turned the wooden horse over. There was something beneath it, a tiny inscription for Alina, his daughter's name. King Daniel's fingers trembled. "Samuel." Captain stepped closer. "Your Majesty." Nobody knew that name. Samuel frowned. King Daniel had chosen the name Alina privately with Queen Amara. It had never appeared in the official records because the child had died before a birth announcement could be issued. So whoever had preserved the toy had known something only the king and queen could have known. Then the crying came again. It seemed to come from beneath the floor. King Daniel followed the sound through the narrow passage. The walls were lined with old wooden beams and faded royal symbols. At the end stood a heavy door. Samuel examined it. "There are no hinges on this side." King Daniel touched the carved lion emblem. "I know this symbol." A memory returned. Years earlier, Queen Amara had once taken King Daniel through the unfinished palace and stopped before this exact carving. Some doors are meant to remain hidden until the right person comes looking. King Daniel had laughed. "Are you hiding treasures from me?" She had smiled. Perhaps. He had never asked again. Now he pressed the lion's eye. A hidden mechanism clicked. The wall shifted. Behind it was a descending staircase. Samuel raised his lantern. "Someone built this recently." "No," King Daniel replied. "My wife knew about it." They descended carefully. At the bottom, they found a small chamber. An oil lamp burned beside an empty cradle. Fresh milk sat in a clay bowl. King Daniel stared at it. Someone had been feeding a child here. Then he noticed a folded piece of white cloth beside the cradle. It carried the royal lion. King Daniel recognized the embroidery immediately. It belonged to Queen Amara. Before he could touch it, a woman's voice whispered from somewhere in the darkness. "Please don't let them take her." King Daniel froze. "Who are you?" Silence. Then hurried footsteps echoed through another passage. Samuel drew his sword. King Daniel stepped forward. Whoever had spoken was already gone. Only the baby's crying remained. And this time, King Daniel understood one terrifying thing. Someone had been hiding a child beneath Moon Palace. King Daniel followed the fatting footsteps through the underground passage, with Captain Samuel and 2 guards close behind. The corridor narrowed until it ended at a stone wall. There was nowhere to go. Samuel examined the floor. "She couldn't have passed us." King Daniel noticed a thin line in the stonework. "Move that torch." Guard lifted the lantern. A concealed door appeared. King Daniel pressed against it, but it would not open. Then he noticed a small royal seal carved into the stone. It was the personal seal Queen Amara had used on private correspondence. A memory returned. Before Alina's birth, Queen Amara had once told King Daniel that the old royal family had built escape chambers beneath several palaces. "Every ruler needs somewhere to hide what must be protected," she had said. King Daniel had smiled. "What could you possibly need to hide?" She had looked at her stomach. "Perhaps our greatest treasure." He had thought she meant their unborn child. Now, 12 years later, he wondered whether she had known something he never understood. King Daniel pressed Amara's seal. The door opened. Inside was a small chamber containing a wooden table, an old cradle, children's blankets, and several empty medicine bottles. But there was no child. On the table lay a tiny gold bracelet. King Daniel picked it up. Engraved across the bracelet were the words, "Alina, daughter of Aduran." His breath caught. That was the name he and Queen Amara had chosen for their daughter. Nobody outside their private chambers had known it. Samuel looked at the bracelet. Your Majesty. King Daniel closed his fist around it. Someone knew she was alive. Before Samuel could answer, King Daniel noticed something else. A fresh candle, still warm, beside it lay a small bowl of milk. Someone had been caring for a child here recently. Then the baby cried again. This time the sound came from behind the far wall. King Daniel approached it slowly. He placed his palm against the stone. The crying stopped. A moment later, a faint knock answered from the other side. 3 knocks. King Daniel looked at Samuel. There's someone behind this wall. And somewhere in the darkness, a frightened child began crying again. King Daniel ordered the guards to examine the hidden chamber, but the wall was too thick to break without risking the structure above them. Samuel searched the room until he discovered a narrow iron handle concealed beneath the table. He pulled it. A section of the floor shifted. Beneath it was a staircase descending farther into the earth. King Daniel stared into the darkness. Whoever built this wanted something protected. Samuel lifted his lantern, or someone. They descended. At the bottom, the passage opened into a small underground room. There was a bed, a cooking hearth, children's books, folded clothing, and shelves filled with carefully stored food. Someone had been living there recently. King Daniel picked up a small dress. It was made for a child of perhaps 10 or 12 years old. His hand tightened. How long has someone been here? Samuel examined the supplies. Judging by the food, Your Majesty, someone has been maintaining this place for years. King Daniel looked toward the dark doorway. Then why did I never know? Neither man answered. A faint sound came from somewhere beyond the chamber, not crying this time, a cough. King Daniel immediately moved toward it. Who's there? Silence. Then an elderly woman's voice answered. Please, Your Majesty, leave. King Daniel stopped. He recognized that voice. Woman stepped into the lantern light. She was older now, her hair completely gray, but King Daniel remembered her clearly. Sarah had been Queen Amara's personal nurse. She had disappeared immediately after the queen's funeral. King Daniel stared at her. For 12 years, everyone believed you fled Aduran. Sarah lowered her eyes. I had to disappear. Why? She looked toward the hidden room behind her. Because I was protecting someone. King Daniel's heart began pounding. Who? Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Before she could answer, a soft cry came from the adjoining chamber. King Daniel stepped forward. Sarah blocked his path. No, move. Your Majesty, if you enter that room, there is no going back. King Daniel's voice became painfully quiet. Sarah, I buried my wife and child 12 years ago. Sarah began to cry. I know. She looked toward the closed door. But only one of them was buried. Sarah's words left King Daniel motionless. Only one of them was buried. He stared at her. My daughter. Sarah nodded. Alina lived. For 12 years, King Daniel had carried the weight of a grave that should never have existed. He had mourned a child he believed had died before he could even hold her. Now his knees weakened. Where is she? Sarah looked toward the sealed inner door. Alive. King Daniel stepped forward, but Sarah caught his arm. Before you see her, you must understand what happened. She explained that Queen Amara had survived the birth. The baby girl was healthy and crying strongly. But the royal physicians secretly declared both mother and child dead after receiving orders from people Sarah refused to name. Amara realized Alina was in danger. Before she was taken away, she gave Sarah the newborn. Take my daughter where they cannot find her, Amara had whispered. Sarah carried Alina through the hidden passage beneath Moon Palace and raised her there with the help of a few loyal servants. But why did you make the king hear a baby's cry? Samuel asked. Sarah pointed toward a small clay instrument hanging beside the door. It was an old royal signaling device. It was designed to imitate an infant's cry and could carry through the palace grounds. She had activated it every night for 7 nights. I knew King Daniel would recognize the sound. King Daniel's eyes filled with tears. You knew I would come. Sarah nodded. Your daughter wanted to meet you, but she was afraid. King Daniel looked toward the door. How old is she? 12. The number struck him. 12 years. The exact age his daughter would have been. Sarah slowly opened the door. Inside, a young girl sat beside a dying fire. Clutching the little wooden horse King Daniel had carved before her birth. She looked up. Their eyes met. And King Daniel knew immediately. The girl slowly stood. King Daniel could not speak. She had Queen Amara's eyes, the same deep brown eyes that had once looked at him across the gardens of Moon Palace. The same small dimple appeared when the girl nervously pressed her lips together. Sarah watched them in silence. The girl looked at King Daniel's crown, then at his face. "You the king?" King Daniel swallowed hard. "Yes," she hesitated. "Are you my father?" The question broke whatever strength he had left. King Daniel lowered himself to his knees. "Yes, my child." Girl stared at him for several seconds before stepping closer. "My name is Alina." "I know." Her eyes widened. "Mother told me." King Daniel looked toward Sarah. "Your mother spoke about me?" "Every day." Alina explained that Sarah had raised her beneath Moon Palace, teaching her to read, teaching her the history of Aduran, and showing her the portrait of the mother she had never been allowed to know. But Sarah had also told her that her father believed she was dead. Alina's voice trembled. "Did you really think I died?" King Daniel nodded. "I was told you lived only minutes." "I waited for you." He closed his eyes. The guilt was unbearable. "I would have searched for you." "I know." She touched his face. "Mother said you would." King Daniel pulled her gently into his arms. For the first time in 12 years, he held his daughter. But the reunion lasted only moments. Sarah suddenly turned toward the passage. "We cannot stay here." King Daniel released Alina. "Why?" Sarah's expression changed. "Because the people who hid her existence know she has been discovered." Samuel stepped forward. "What people?" Sarah looked directly at King Daniel. "The same people who made you believe Queen Amara and Alina were dead." Then came the sound of footsteps above them, several men approaching. King Daniel immediately drew his sword. Alina moved behind him. Sarah whispered, "Have found us." King Daniel looked toward the passage. This time, he was not protecting a memory. He was protecting his daughter. The footsteps above grew louder. King Daniel tightened his grip on his sword as Captain Samuel moved the guards into position along the narrow passage. "Take Alina behind me," King Daniel ordered. Sarah shook her head. "She cannot remain here. They will search every chamber." "Who are they?" Sarah hesitated. "The men who served the people responsible for Queen Amara's death." The words struck King Daniel. "Tell me everything." Sarah finally revealed what she had kept hidden for 12 years. Queen Amara had survived Alina's birth. She had even held her daughter and spoken to Sarah before the conspirators returned. But Amara had discovered the plan to erase Alina from the succession. She knew her daughter would never survive if she remained inside the palace. So Sarah had carried newborn Alina through the secret passage, while Amara stayed behind. "Your mother gave me one instruction," Sarah told Alina. "She said, 'Save my daughter. Let Daniel believe we are both gone until it is safe.'" King Daniel closed his eyes. For 12 years, he had mourned Amara without knowing that her final act had been to save their child. A violent crash shook the hidden door. "They're here," Samuel warned. King Daniel looked at Alina. "Your mother saved you." Alina's eyes filled with tears. "And you came. I heard you." The door burst open. 3 armed men rushed inside. Samuel's guards met them immediately. Steel struck against steel in the narrow passage. King Daniel shielded Alina, while Sarah moved toward a second hidden exit. One attacker broke through and raised his blade. King Daniel stepped forward. The man's eyes widened when he recognized him. "Your Majesty." "Who sent you?" The man hesitated. Then a familiar royal seal fell from beneath his clothing. King Daniel picked it up. His face changed. The seal belonged to Lord Victor Danjuma, one of the most powerful men on his council. The same man who had stood beside King Daniel when Amara was buried. The same man who had comforted him when Alina was declared dead. King Daniel looked at the seal. The betrayal suddenly reached into the highest chamber of his kingdom. King Daniel stared at the royal seal in his palm. "Victor." The name left his mouth like a wound reopening. For 12 years, Lord Victor Danjuma had stood beside the throne as one of Aduran's most trusted advisors. He had helped King Daniel rebuild the kingdom after Amara's death, managed royal trade agreements, and repeatedly warned him about threats to the succession. Now the pieces finally connected. King Daniel turned to the captured soldier. "Where is Lord Victor?" The man remained silent. Samuel stepped forward. "He is at the royal council chamber. He requested an emergency meeting tonight." King Daniel understood. Victor had not sent those men merely to find Alina. He had discovered that the secret was exposed and was preparing to control the story before the king could reveal the truth. King Daniel returned to the hidden chamber. Sarah handed him another object, a sealed letter bearing Queen Amara's personal mark. "She gave me this before she died." King Daniel broke the seal. His eyes moved across the page. Amara explained that she had survived Alina's birth but had discovered the conspiracy. She knew Victor, and the physician intended to remove Alina from the succession. She had therefore allowed Sarah to hide their daughter. Then came the final revelation. Amara had been poisoned after Alina was taken away. Her death had been made to look like complications from childbirth. King Daniel lowered the letter. For 12 years, he had believed death had stolen his family. Now he knew someone had stolen the truth. Alina stood beside him. "Was my mother afraid?" King Daniel looked at her. She was. He knelt and held her hands. "But she was brave enough to save you." Above them, the palace bells suddenly began ringing. Samuel looked toward the stairs. "The council has been summoned." King Daniel rose. He placed the letter inside his royal robe. "Then let them hear the truth." With Alina beside him and Sarah following closely, King Daniel walked toward the palace. For the first time in 12 years, he was not returning as a grieving husband. He was returning as a father who had found his daughter, and a king who was coming for the man who had stolen her from him. The council chamber fell silent when King Daniel entered. Every noble rose. Then they saw the girl walking beside him. Lord Victor Danjama's face went pale. King Daniel stopped before the throne. "Do you recognize her?" Victor said nothing. King Daniel removed Amara's letter and placed it before the council. "This is Princess Alina, my daughter. She was born alive 12 years ago. Queen Amara was alive after the birth. Both were deliberately declared dead." A shocked murmur swept through the chamber. Mama Ruth was brought forward and confirmed the birth. Sarah testified that she had carried Alina through the hidden passage after Amara discovered the conspiracy. Finally, the captured soldier identified Victor's seal. Victor could no longer deny it. He had helped arrange Amara's poisoning and the disappearance of Alina because her existence threatened the political power he had spent 12 years building. King Daniel's eyes filled with tears. "You stood beside me when I buried my wife." Victor lowered his head. "I had no choice." "You always had a choice." Victor was arrested. The conspirators were later tried and stripped of their positions. But King Daniel's greatest victory was not the punishment. It was the moment he returned to Moon Palace with Alina. The abandoned palace was restored, but he ordered the old nursery preserved exactly as it had been. The wooden horse he had carved for his unborn daughter was placed beside Alina's bed. That night, King Daniel stood outside her room. For 12 years, he had heard a baby crying from the abandoned palace. Tonight, there was only silence. He looked toward Amara's portrait hanging above the fireplace. "She found her way home," he whispered. Alina appeared beside him. "Father." King Daniel turned and smiled. "Yes, my child. Will you stay?" He took her hand. "Always." And finally, King Daniel understood the truth behind every midnight cry. It had never been a ghost. It had never been a curse. It had been a daughter, hidden for 12 years, calling for the father who believed he had lost her. The abandoned palace was no longer abandoned. It had finally become home. This story teaches us that truth may be hidden, but it cannot remain buried forever. It also reminds us that fear can create silence, but love and courage can eventually bring the truth to light. Now tell us, would you forgive Sarah for hiding Alina for 12 years? If you were King Daniel, would you forgive the people who betrayed your family? Speech Balloon, share your answer in the comments. If this story touched your heart, like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more African folktales and emotional stories.